I've worked with thousands of people that have destroyed themselves trying to be tough guys. When you're doing this toughness training, whether it be internal toughness or physical toughness, not a lot of people know where the line is between when they're just dealing with discomfort or something that'll heal and when they're actually damaging themselves. For example, I've worked with countless athletes that pushed themselves into stress fractures and had their 4th and 5th metatarsal or their tibia stress fracture, and that puts them out sometimes for 4, 5, 6 months, depending on their nutritional profile and how well they listen to the therapist. So what tips would you give somebody for knowing where the line is between being a tough guy and being an idiot?
Short answer is metabolic stress versus structural stress, knowing to distinguish between the two. The longer answer involves the definition of toughness, or mental toughness specifically, and why tough people are more predisposed to those kinds of injuries. Because toughness, mental toughness is a very messy concept in the research, but if you distill it down, it means goal fixedness for the most part, which is a pretty narrow thing, which is that I have an objective and I'm not going to let anything keep me from that objective. If you're a tough person, you work towards something without letting anything deter you. But as an isolated variable, toughness on its own is only helpful up to a certain point. There's kind of a bell curve, and you have to consider the other factors that are involved, or the other personality traits that are involved with toughness. I don't know if you caught this story, we open our book with it. My buddy, the one actually who runs the sub 5 miles when he's in his 40s now, when he was a recon medic in the Marines, and he was supervising a sniper training exercise. So a bunch of guys who were crawling around in the grass trying to sneak towards an objective in the desert, like get up close to a target, and then they'd either make a shot or they just report they'd be able to see something like a little number that they had to be close enough to see without being seen. And we'll call him Doc. He gave his med brief before this exercise started, and he went through all the usual, like, these are the things that can go wrong. You're familiar with these, like, this is what can go wrong. This is what you do if it does. And one of the last things he said was, and there's a lot of snakes out here, so if you get bitten by a snake, try to keep the snake. That way they can know if it was venomous and what type of antivenom they'll need to treat it. And Doc is sitting there in a truck, like kind of just glassing the field or watching the field that all these sniper students are crawling around in. And he sees this guy jump up out of the grass, throw his arms over his head, kind of like he's doing a burpee, and then just slam back down to the ground and disappear back into the grass. And he's sitting there puzzling over this, trying to figure out what's just happened. And he gets a call over the radio from one of the instructors that ran up to it. And they tell him that they need him right now, and he needs to go treat 11 snake bites. And he thinks that somehow the entire like sniper team got bit by snakes, and there's 11 different guys. But no, it was one guy with 11 snake bites. And so this was a very mentally tough scout sniper student who had one objective in his mind. And that was, he's going to skull drag or crawl his way to this target without being seen. And he's crawling along, and he heard a rattle, and he looked up and focused his eyes fairly close in front of him, and there was a really big timber rattlesnake that was coiled up and facing him. And just as he looked up at it, his one arm was up in front of his head while he was low crawling, and it bit him and popped him on the arm. So now this guy who has one primary objective, which was complete the stalk, like make it to the target without being seen, he now has another objective, which is you have to keep the snake, because Doc said keep the snake. So this guy was going to absolutely do what he was told to do. And so as soon as it popped him on the arm, he reached out and tried to grab it with his other arm, got bit on the top of the hand, I think, and proceeded into basically a fist fight with a rattlesnake laying down on the grass.
Bad idea.
Got bit repeatedly. Like, the snake worked his way up, popped him on the shoulder, popped him on the top of the head, and then finally he latched onto it and was wrestling with it, and the snake gave up and tried to crawl away. As it was getting away, he grabbed it by the tail and jumped. This is what Doc saw. He jumped up on his feet, threw the snake over his head, and slammed the snake down on the ground and hit its head on a rock and killed it. And then collapsed down into the grass and thought he was going to finish his stalk and carry his pet snake with him so that he could give it to Doc. But instead, he started blacking out. And that was about when the instructors saw him or ran up on him, and they got Doc. And like most people, when they heard that instruction, if you get bit by a snake, try to keep the snake would put that in context. Like try to pin it down with the butt of your rifle or shoot it from a safe distance with a pistol or something. Do something safe that allows us to keep the snake so we can identify it. This guy skipped all of that and just went straight to the I will get this snake at all costs, even if it means a fight to the death under the grass. And as they were loading this guy into the ambulance, he was mostly unconscious, but he could still kind of talk and see shapes and hear sounds. He was still holding his rattlesnake, and he would not give it up because his objective was to keep the snake, and Doc told him to keep the snake. So he had to like hold his face in his hands and tell him, "You're done. You did a good job. The mission is over. You got the snake. You kept the snake. You can let it go now." And he finally let it go. But that's an example of what mental toughness, without any other context, really is. It's this irrational goal fixedness, where if you have it to an extreme degree, like clearly this sniper was a very tough person, but you don't combine that with cognitive flexibility or the capacity to reappraise and adapt to a changing situation, then mental toughness can push you into a really dangerous or problematic scenario. And that happens with a lot of athletes, where they're going to follow this training plan no matter what happens.